Hello. Are your cabbages and kale full of holes? Today I'm going to look at how to protect your brassicas without using chemicals. So you've probably seen in the garden that I have lots of these tunnels with green netting on them. And there are various different types of netting that you can get that is designed specifically for keeping butterflies out. And when I first started growing in this garden, I decided I would try using scaffolding netting. So this is scaffold debris netting, and it has a bit of a problem in that it actually comes with holes in it, which if you're trying to exclude butterflies and moths is not terribly helpful. So it has a line down most of it that has eyelet holes reinforced in it, and what I've done here is taken it into the house and I've sewn along it I've made a fold and I've sewn along it and then I've folded it flat and sewn along it again, so I now have quite a smooth flat piece of material. You can leave it with the flap sticking up and you can use it without. I still have a couple of tunnels where I haven't sewn it up. So I've got the material to put over my brassicas, but I don't really want it lying straight on to the brassicas because the butterflies can then land on the netting and lay their eggs through the netting. So it's better if you can devise some sort of frame for it to go over. And to give you some idea of some of the frames that you could make, here's Ray from Ray's Allotment.
So this is one of my covers, and we make these out of old pallets, bits of offcuts of timber, and these are covered in scaffolding netting, and this netting is quite thin and it does keep the butterflies out. The good things with my little tunnels is that we can just lift them off, de-weed and put them back on. This one I've covered the sprouts with, but the sprouts have outgrown the cage, but the butterflies could land on here and lay their eggs. So it looks so far to be okay, but does need another plan. So my next plan is the tunnel next door. So this is my netted tunnel, and it's a step up from the cage for the sprouts. The sprouts are grown really tall. Well, let's have a look and I'll show you inside. So inside my polytunnel frame, and I was going to grow squashes around the outside, but we decided to put the scaffolding netting around the outside, and what a difference it's made. These sprouts are nearly 5 foot tall, and they're just growing like anything now, and it's great to be able to walk in, harvest and walk out the door again. So this year is a bonus on the tunnel. So my plan for next year is to strip out all these raspberries and the tomato experiment in there, and this will be a brassica bed solely for brassicas, totally, so we can walk in, harvest, walk out, done. No more messing about with cages, frames and such like.
One of the best ways that I've found to create this tunnel is with bamboo canes and some of this flexible piping, which can be found at builders merchants. This blue one would have been, it says it's for water. It's a 25mm tube, and I've also got some that I think could be 32, but it's sturdy enough not to blow over in the wind, but it's flexible enough to be able to curve it and bend it into the shape that you want it to be. So what you do is you push the stick into the ground on each side of your row of brassicas, and the piping gets put over the top like so, and then same on the other side, and then you can stretch the netting across it. You'll see that the ends are gathered in tight, and I usually have a brick on here to keep the netting tight around the base to discourage things from being able to access it underneath. And I've got wood on the sides to hold it down. So here we go. Here's the piping. It's this one, the sticks have rotted away inside it. That's not so good, so I'll just push it back into the ground for now. You can see I've also got a bamboo cane across the top. Now that's not essential. I did this when I was hoping to have these very high, so on tall sticks, because I was going to be growing some tall brassicas. And in fact, in this bed, the brassicas have got too tall for the netting already. So if you want to put a bamboo cane across just to support the netting, all I've done is tie a piece of baling twine onto the tubing and then tie it around the cane, and I've tied it underneath rather than on top. And I've done it both ways, but I found when I had it on top, it very often and very quickly slipped down, whereas this way it seems to stay just a little bit better. The other thing you need to do is make sure that you have put some sort of eye protection on the end of your cane, which I haven't done, and I should have done. I have a little toad who lives in this corner here. There you go, friend. In the past, I've sown my brassicas in the greenhouse or the polytunnel and then planted them out when they're big enough under netting. But this year, I made the mistake of not checking as I was planting the seedlings out. So it's not an issue in this tunnel, but in one of my other tunnels, my brassicas are all but decimated. So I think in the future, I'll sow my seeds and I'll actually wrap them in a little bit of fleece to keep them warm, and I'll put them under a tunnel right from the word go, so they're protected from butterflies and moths from the very beginning. And then hopefully I'll end up with plenty of cabbages that look like this rather than ones that look like lace. I'm really pleased to be able to say that my first book, Grounded, will be published in February, and it explains how and why I end up growing so much of my own food. And if you want to pre-order a signed copy of that, I'll leave a link on the screen and in the video description. And in this tunnel, I've done things slightly differently. Rather than putting a stick into the ground and the tube over the top of it, I have banged the legs from an old trampoline. So our neighbours very kindly gave us 2 old trampolines, so we have plenty of these legs. And then the tubing sits inside it. So there it is, the pole in the ground, and this goes inside it. And actually, I found this a much stronger, a much sturdier way of holding the piping in place than having a stick into the ground. And it's also allowed me to put them much further apart to make a lower but much wider tunnel. This very tall Brassica cage came from Gardening Naturally. I'll leave links in the description to them. And it's great because it's a walk-in one, or more to the point, you can walk in, but you have to walk under the cross pieces, dip under them each time. But it's a nice tall cage. Now these posts should have gone further into the ground than we've put them. I simply couldn't bang them any further into the ground. And I think the netting should be clipped onto these posts to keep it tight. But because I wanted to try growing even more food in it, I've used these pieces of piping pushed onto sticks to pull the edges out, so that I've got cabbages growing along the edges. They're all about to come out, as will this piping. I'll then take the netting closer in so it's not moving around in the wind. One of the things you really need to do is to make sure that the sides touching the ground, your netting actually touches the ground and is secured there, so caterpillars and butterflies can't crawl in under your netting. So what I've done here is pin the netting down at the sides And then I've put wood chips along the edges to actually seal it down, so this netting goes underneath the path I'm walking on. Not by very much, but enough to stop it flapping around in the wind. What you do need to be a bit careful about though is that when you are harvesting, well actually, here's Jane Kelly from Jane's Allotment to explain the problem.
Hello, it's Jane here. Because we don't use any chemicals on our plot, the main thing we use is like a barrier method for protection. So we tend to cover our prized possessions in this mesh, and I don't know if you can pick up behind me. This is our kale. This is something we have not covered, and it is absolutely ravaged. Fine earlier on in the season, but you can see that now. It's like a piece of that cheese. Gouda cheese, whichever one it is, but absolutely got it. Not just by caterpillars, to be fair, but we're surrounded by huge trees with pigeons on them. So they've had a feast on that. To be honest, we've had so much coming from it anyway. I'm not that precious about it. However, we do love our Cavolo Nero. So this has been mollycoddled from day one. But what I would say is if you are going to use mesh, be very, very careful because, well, for one thing, you've got to make sure that you don't trap things inside. Very often there've been a couple of blackbirds in here, so I've opened the mesh to take some pickings, and then as I've closed it again, I've realised there's been a couple of birds in here, so make sure to get them out, otherwise they'll get stuck. But the other thing you need to make sure of, and again, I don't know if the camera can pick it up from there, I will show you, is you take the mesh off, you manage to get in and get your pickings, other things manage to get in as well. In there's a few flies, but there's a great big cabbage white having a field day on our Cavolo Nero. So I would recommend, if you're going to put mesh on your crops, just be very careful. As well as keeping things out, it can keep things in. So be careful to go through your crops before you recover it again.
I talked a little earlier about there being different types of netting, and this being the debris netting. And Jane uses a white, very fine mesh netting, and there are several different companies that produce that. Over the very tall Brassica tunnel, I've got a soft butterfly netting, and this is another version of it. It's a bit more rigid, it feels more plasticky rather than a more soft netting. But I wanted to show you the size of the holes. They are about 1/2 centimetre or less. And any holes larger than this, you're very likely to get butterflies and moths being able to squeeze through it. A part of me thinks out of choice I wouldn't use one with holes this large, but this is the same size as the netting used on my tall Brassica tunnel, and I've seen absolutely no evidence of any butterflies or moths getting in there whatsoever. There is some slug damage, but that's another story and one that we'll deal with on another day. And I want to say thanks to Jane and Ray for their help in making today's video. Don't forget to go and check out Jane at Jane's Allotment and Ray at the Gardening Channel with Ray. And so, wherever you are in the world and whatever you've got planned for today, I hope it's a good one. I also hope you'll join me again next time.